Hi everyone! In this clip, we'll introduce Together Initiative, a faith-based, multi-congregational inner-city ministry.
Here's a brief history of Together Initiative. In 2012, volunteers from Congregation of Lion of Judah began ministering to people around what we call Miracle Mile on Saturday mornings. What started out as volunteers handing out breakfast on a street corner evolved into an indoor service with worship, sermon, and a warm breakfast for 50 to 100 guests. In 2018, Lion of Judah partnered with Symphony Church, Antioch Community Church, Cornerstone Church of Boston, among others, to expand the capacities and volunteer base of the ministry. In the summer of 2019, some of the volunteers received the conviction from God to intentionally deepen relationships with guests who attended Saturday breakfast. We also recognize that accessing many of the social services and community resources requires structured and persistent involvement. Without basic material means like a phone and internet, or social support from a community, many guests are unable to take advantage of the existing services. In January 2020, a group of us from various churches began to meet each month to blueprint these newfound convictions into Holy Spirit-powered applications. In May 2020, Together Initiative was born.
And here's the mission of our organization: to bridge the needs of our neighbors experiencing homelessness and addiction to community resources through intentional, Christ-centered relationships. We settled on the name Together Initiative from recognizing the need to embrace our mutual brokenness, regardless of whether we have a home or not, whether we're materially rich or poor. Our perspective is less about how we can quote-unquote fix the materially poor. It's more about how we can walk together, asking God to redeem and restore all of us.
Here's a framework that helps us position our ministry. This framework is built on what is presented in the book When Helping Hurts. We strongly recommend reading this book for anyone interested in outreach ministry. We can think of 3 ways to help our neighbors experiencing material poverty: engagement, connection, and advocacy.
Engagement refers to providing immediate, temporary relief to material needs by offering food and clothing. Saturday morning outreach at Lion of Judah or soup kitchens run in various parts of the city are some examples of this.
Next, we have connection, which we refer to as beginning of the recovery and restoration process. We think of this as occurring over a longer period of time than engagement, but still temporary. An example of connection includes making referrals and connecting people to resources.
Lastly, we have advocacy, which we think about as people and communities working together to improve lives. It's ongoing and continuous. And examples of this include helping to build a support system, or calling agencies or client services on behalf of or with our neighbors or guests that we're reaching out to.
As we move from left to right, there's a greater need and reason for relationship building, greater meshing of lives between guests and volunteers.
So Together Initiative aims to build on the connection and advocacy aspects of this framework. So we see our core competency as supporting relationship building, discipleship making, and referral to existing resources. There are many ministries and organizations in Boston that focus on providing material relief, which tend to be immediate and temporary, like we talked about. But many of these programs lack longitudinal follow-up, relationship building, and discipleship making, which are key to the reconciliation of the materially poor. So really, we see our ministry as an add-on to other services that focus on engagement and providing relief. For example, by partnering with the street ministry at Lion of Judah, we have expanded its scope by connecting volunteers with guests to make weekly check-in calls and compiling a database of community resources that would allow us to make referrals. We dream with God that maybe one day we will scale this ministry to partner with soup kitchens and other relief organizations in the city.
Our core operations include check-in calls and individualized action plans. A key to building any relationship is consistent proximity and contact over a period of time. With check-in calls, we envision pairing a volunteer with 1 to 3 guests, and for the volunteer to make weekly or bi-weekly check-in phone calls to each guest. During these calls, the volunteer and the guest can chat about their week and pray for one another. Check-in calls are an important means for volunteers and guests to build relationships beyond the temporary touchpoints of relief-focusing programs.
At Lion of Judah, we started a pilot program for check-in calls in June 2020. Many of the guests have smartphones or mobile phones, and we have compiled their phone numbers in a secure database. And we also have current guests who are invited to share their phone numbers and receive check-in calls. We have also partnered with Assurance Wireless, which freely provides smartphones to low-income individuals and households. So in this pilot program, from June to December of 2020, we have collectively made 611 calls, had more than 366 conversations, and 21 volunteers connected with 35 guests.
The second part of our core operation is the Individualized Action Plan, or IAP, process. It is designed to help assess guests' assets, needs, and goals, and to empower them to reach their spiritual, personal, and professional potential. We envision that volunteers will use IAP to have structured resource referral conversations with guests. The Greater Boston area has an abundance of existing programs and resources designed to serve individuals experiencing material poverty and/or homelessness. Our goal is not to develop or operate new social services, but to work with existing ones. We seek to refer guests to the wealth of resources, support, and aid that are already available. We have compiled a list of these resources and have organized them into categorized resource sheets.
Here's a screenshot of the first page of the asset assessment questionnaire that will kickstart the IAP process. The questionnaire has detailed questions about each dimension, like housing, food access, social support, health insurance, physical, mental health, spiritual health, job, employment, and income. Together, the volunteer and the guest will assess whether the guest is thriving, is stable, at risk, or in crisis for each dimension.
And here is an example resource sheet on housing that we could hand out to guests. Both the asset assessment questionnaire and the resource sheets will be used by volunteers to help connect with and advocate for our guests. To support these processes, we plan to hire an advocacy coach who will train and equip our volunteers to effectively advocate for our guests. The advocacy coach will be available for volunteers to receive guidance, debrief after guest interactions, and identify strategies to reach goals with their paired guests.
And here are some photos from the Saturday breakfast or street ministry at Lion of Judah. We're working on setting up a connection and advocacy booth during this time where guests can stop by to speak with our advocacy coach and volunteers, sign up to receive check-in calls, learn more about our city's resources, receive prayer, and more.
Thanks for watching. We look forward to serving with you.